Join me, Darren Grimes, for Real Britain every Saturday and Sunday from 2 p.m. A news hour that comes with a trigger warning. Scorching hot opinion with prominent guests saying the unsayable and a little bit of weekend fun thrown in. Unlike other broadcasters, I won't be forgetting what the B in our name stands for. So howie in for Real Britain Saturday and Sunday from 2 p.m.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Dewbs and Youre. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debate, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Dewbs and Youre.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome to GB News tonight with me, Bev Turner, as we roll towards the end of this lovely bank holiday weekend. We've got a great show coming up. Teachers worried about overweight kids are calling for us to change the classrooms rather than encourage the children to get fit. Discuss. Midwives can no longer use the word vagina in the birthing room in case it upsets transgender mums or dads-to-be. Can we please stop having our language policed at women's expense? And we've had 5 days to digest the most bizarre story of the year, and there have been a few. The government's plans to fly illegal immigrants to Rwanda. I've had little time to form a few thoughts on this. I'm sure you have too, and I'll tell you what mine are at the top of the show, but you'll also hear from our brilliant panel, and I do want to know what you think. So do not go anywhere. First though, here are the news headlines with Polly.
It's just after 6 o'clock. The headlines this hour. The family of a former British soldier who was captured by Russia says prisoner of war rules should be adhered to and he must be treated humanely. Sean Pinner, who was taken while fighting in Mariupol, and another British citizen, Aidan Aslin, appeared on Russian state TV asking for help to return home. It's not clear how freely the pair could speak.
To Boris Johnson. Obviously, I'm Sean Pinner. A lot's gone on over the last 5 or 6 weeks that I'm not fully aware of. Obviously, I understand that Mr. Medvedchuk has been detained, and we look to exchange myself and Aidan Aslin for Mr. Medvedchuk. Obviously, I'd really appreciate your help in this matter and pushing this agenda.
Meanwhile, in Ukraine, it suffered its first civilian casualties in the western city of Lviv. The mayor says at least 7 people were killed after 5 Russian missile strikes hit the city. The situation in the east, particularly around Mariupol, has also been described as extremely difficult, and no evacuation corridors have been opened up for a second consecutive day.
What we see in Ukraine today is a genocide that the aggressor is carrying out on purpose, killing civilians. 7 civilians had plans for life. Today, their lives have ended. This means that all cities and villages are in the same situation because the aggressor is committing acts of genocide. He is targeting civilians. He is killing civilians.
Here, the Home Secretary is challenging critics of her controversial plan to send migrants to Africa to come up with a better solution. Writing a joint article in the Times newspaper with Rwanda's foreign minister, Priti Patel reiterated that her plans were bold and innovative. That comes after the leader of the Church of England, Justin Welby, said the proposals raised serious ethical questions. Business and Energy Minister Greg Hands told GB News the government is convinced it'll work.
We're confident that through the different migration laws and immigration laws and police and borders bills that we have and acts that we have over recent years, that this scheme is legal. As I say, it's also a sovereign agreement between 2 sovereign countries, the UK and Rwanda.
A man's been arrested on suspicion of attempted murder following an incident in Westminster in London. The 29-year-old allegedly confronted 2 MOD police officers with a knife in Horse Guards Parade. No injuries were reported and the incident is not being treated as terror-related. Police Scotland says no action will be taken against the First Minister after video emerged of her without a face mask indoors during a local council election campaign. The force spoke to Nicola Sturgeon to remind her of the importance of wearing a face covering when there is a legal requirement to do so. In a statement, she apologised, saying she realised her error seconds after entering a barber shop and immediately put it on. The legal requirement to wear face masks on public transport or inside public spaces has been since lifted. And Team UK has won gold in the shot put at the Invictus Games. Claiming the medal, Lisa Johnston, who became an amputee in 2016, said she wanted to show her children anything is possible. The Duke and Duchess of Sussex congratulated and embraced her on the track. On TV, online and on your radio via DAB+, you're with GB News. Now more from Beth.
Hello, good evening. Welcome. Thank you for joining us, whether you are listening on DAB radio, watching on the app or online or old school, watching on your TV. Remember, we need to hear your opinions too. So do get in touch on Twitter at GB News or email us gbviews@gbnews.uk. We have an excellent panel for you tonight. Journalist Joe Phillips is with us, ethnographer and academic Dr. Lisa Mackenzie, and businessman and former Brexit MEP Ben Habib. I also want to know your thoughts. Do get in touch with me. As I say, the usual way is Twitter at GB News is probably the best. And can I also remind you to subscribe to our YouTube page? You can watch live or see the best bits from the channel when you search GB News. So, first of all, let's kick off. Regardless of where you sit politically or how you feel about immigration, Priti Patel's announcement that we will start sending unauthorised asylum seekers on a one-way ticket to Rwanda will have got your attention. Some would say that was the point. It stopped us talking about Partygate. But this has clearly been a long time in the planning, and with the UK paying £5 million a day to house asylum seekers in our hotels, something clearly had to be done. But is this the solution? Is this perhaps another unworkable example of Boris Johnson's utopian thinking? Another garden bridge which cost £53 million and never got built. Boris Island, remember that? His airport on the Thames he was going to build? And what about the £2.6 million press briefing room at number 10, which is presumably now used for parties only? So, panel, Is this immigration plan genius or sheer unworkable madness? Lisa, I will come to you first. First of all, it feels like one of those stories, it's like, where were you when you heard? Where were you when you heard that we were going to send?
Well, I was actually here.
Oh, were you?
I was with Michelle a few weeks ago, and she just sort of said, there's this story that's floating around about Rwanda.
And you thought, is it April the 1st?
Yeah, well, and I just thought, no, that's never going to happen. That's, you know, it just sounds ridiculous. It sounds absolutely crazy. But do you know, today, when I've been coming here today, I've just got my head in my hands thinking how much more money is going to be wasted on these, you know. Yeah, I had this debate with Michelle last time I was here. Yes, there are issues around people trafficking, but there has got to be a better way than these mythical flights that's going to take people to Rwanda, which I actually don't think is ever going to happen. I think it will be a garden bridge.
Well, maybe, Ben, but I mean, clearly, for me, when I heard this story, and you know, we didn't tackle it on when I was here on Friday, but I was quite glad because I needed a little bit of time to get my head around it as well. And it's almost like they sat around in the Home Office and said, which country has the worst PR problem will become the most unappealing place for people to go? I know. What do people associate with mass genocide, with terrible political corruption over the years? Yeah. Let's go for Rwanda. That'll be the deterrent.
Yeah, well, I mean, you know, the policy fails even before you get to Rwanda. It's complex and it's vastly expensive. Yeah. What you didn't say in your opening remarks, which is, you know, I think pertinent to the debate, is that it only applies to single men.
Yes. Yeah.
Now, at most, that's going to be a deterrent to single men. So what we're, in effect, doing is encouraging more families and children to come across the channel. And no doubt lots of single men will come under the cover of families. And once they're here, there'll be huge judicial disputes, legal challenges and so on to any deportation instruction that's issued. So I'm with Lisa. I think I'll be surprised if we see any people getting on planes going to Rwanda. If we do see a few going there, it's going to be at vast expense. It's not going to be a deterrent. And then you've still got all the problems of what might happen to them in Rwanda, all the optics with this Tory government, which this Tory government would have to face in 6 to 9 months, when the inevitable stories of human rights abuses for the refugees that would otherwise have been happily ensconced in the UK, you know, in Rwanda, facing, facing a government which, as you say, Bev, has a history, perhaps not unique, but certainly, you know, right up there at the top of human rights abuses. I mean, you couldn't make this up.
No. Well, somebody did. Somebody has made this up. I think that's the point. Someone somewhere has sat in a room and gone, I know, this is a great idea.
Let's get everybody talking, as you
It's
said
like
in your
something
intro.
out of brass eye, isn't it? Like, it genuinely seems like satire. Who thought it up, Jo, and why?
Well, I imagine probably David Canzini, who's the new whiz kid in Number 10, to get the pressure off Partygate. But did you know, as you can't make it up anymore, that apparently under this agreement, in the small print, we are going to take refugees in from Rwanda. So those who fled war or persecution and were granted asylum status will be able to come to the UK under a reciprocal scheme. But I mean, you know, the problem is the morality is what's been taking up the front pages and the discussion. And I think there are very, very big questions about the morality of this. But I absolutely agree with Ben. This won't happen. It's completely unworkable. Yeah. And it starts with sending people to a small village in Yorkshire where the local people and the local MP didn't know anything about it. And what's to stop people just absconding? I mean, it's not... Unless you've got a notice up saying, do not get on this boat because you could end up in Rwanda, how's it going to stop anything? It's not tackling the problem.
Well, presumably, I guess the idea is that the people traffickers who are in communication with the desperate souls that want to leave their countries, whether you consider them to be desperate souls or whether you consider them to be economic migrants, they want to leave those countries. Are the human traffickers going to be saying to them, well, I can get you to the UK, but then you're actually going to end up on a flight to Rwanda?
Of course they're not.
Of course they're not.
No.
So how do they
in
find
the small
out?
print, you mean?
And also, and also, you know, I'm assuming that people trafficking is a very lucrative business.
Yeah.
So I'm sure they're not going to be giving that business up very easily. here. No. So I think, like Ben said, there will be, you know, a swap. Well,
but it's disgraceful on so many levels. Israel tried it and had to abandon it.
Yeah. Australia still does.
Australia does it, but Australia's got a slightly different thing in the repelling.
Yes.
You know, but that was another bonkers idea.
And Australia has bilateral agreements with the countries from which these people come, firm bilateral agreements which are adhered to. You know, unlike the bilateral agreement we have with France, which is observed in the breach, the French don't fulfil their obligations to the United Kingdom.
It's
under
going
the
to be,
agreement
but
we have
if,
with them.
because we've all been talking about it, if you're going to throw, there's the dead cat. If you're going to throw a big news story out to distract from something else, and then we all talk about it, but then it doesn't become enacted, that's even worse for the government.
But you know what's going to happen?
Though, but
Sorry,
this is Boris Johnson's history. I mean, as you said in your introduction, we've had the Garden Bridge. What a waste of money that was, and it didn't happen.
£53 million.
We were going to have a bridge between Ireland and Scotland, weren't we, to avoid the hard border. We've had so many harebrained schemes. We've had the idea of putting barrages in the channel, quite what that would have done to the ferries when they were sailing, which, of course, they're not at the moment, thanks to P&O.
Yeah.
You know, all of these bonkers ideas. And meanwhile, we're now putting more naval ships into the channel. It is international maritime law that you have to help people in distress. So actually, you're making it much more attractive to people.
Well, if it does work, if this does work, I mean, listen,
it won't.
I know you're all saying,
works,
come on, guys, let's be optimistic.
If it works, it'll be the first complex.
I can't be optimistic. I mean, you know, I am not a Conservative voter or fan.
Yeah.
But I have heard David Davis speak on this, and you know, people in their own party are saying it will be cheaper to put people up in the Ritz Hotel for a year and send their children to Eton, and.
I don't know if it's that expensive.
Well, no, it can't be. I mean, if it's a processing and a one-way ticket to Rwanda, it can't be that.
But I'm not sure who this policy is aimed at.
It's aimed at the front pages to stop us talking
I am
about
going to
Partygate.
I'm going to have a little more faith that there is a bit more meat on the bones of this story than you guys are describing. So, Rwanda, it is a country the size of Belgium, roughly, with a high population density of about 13 million people. The average age of the Rwandans is 19 years old, which is remarkable. So you can see why they would want people to be there to increase their working population. It is a World Economic Forum centre for the Fourth Industrial Revolution, Ministry of Information, Communication, Technology and Innovation. They are one of the global leaders in that area. They want to be. They're not yet. OK? But there are people in power who have huge ambitions for Rwanda to be on the map in terms of a communication centre, technological centre. Maybe there is something good in this. Maybe these immigrants will get off in Rwanda and have a wonderful life.
But even the Rwandan government doesn't believe in the plan. And the reason I say that is part of the detail, and I'm very grateful to Joe for pointing out the reciprocal nature of the refugees, but another part of the detail, which as a businessman absolutely strikes me right between the eyes, is that the Rwandans wanted payment up front.
Yeah.
We have just paid them £120 million
we are
to
such
sign
idiots.
on the dotted line. We're such idiots.
We are such idiots.
If the Rwandans believed this was a long-term, fruitful plan out of which they could make good profits and money for Rwanda,
or have decent people there.
They wouldn't have required that 120 million. And to put that into context, Rwanda has a GDP of about 10 billion a year. So that's over 1% of their GDP. It's a massive influx of capital. Why wouldn't they sign the deal?
Yeah.
And who's going to police it? You know, we know from anecdotally from the Israeli experiment that people were taken over there and then they just disappeared. And some of them disappeared. And in December, only a few months ago, Julian Braithwaite, who's Director General for the Europe at the Foreign Commonwealth Office, actually spoke in Geneva and said, "We remain concerned, however, by continued restrictions to civil and political rights and media freedom. And on the Foreign Office's own website, you are advised not to go to Rwanda if you're gay or transgender."
Yeah. But, you know, meanwhile, what I think we need to talk about is this government's mass loss of money. You know, the money.
The wastage is phenomenal.
And meanwhile, we've got people that are afraid to put the kettle on.
Yeah,
you know,
absolutely.
we've got, you know, lack of doctors, dentists,
NHS waiting
you
lists,
know,
poor housing. On the
housing.
All I will say though is, okay, so we're doing exactly what Priti Patel has been complaining about in the press today, because she said everybody's lining up to criticise this, but none of you are telling me what I should be doing
Well,
instead.
it's very, very
Go on,
simple.
Ben,
It's
go on.
very, very simple. You have to police your borders at the border. Yes, we have a complex border because it's fluid, literally fluid, but you've got to police the border at the border. We have a bilateral agreement with France. They've had £250 million of us, and we've had nothing to show in return. And we have to make sure the French adhere to their obligations. If they don't do it, then the Royal Navy needs to tow these people back. This is where my fellow panellists are going to absolutely shake their heads at me. We've been in violent agreement so far. No. But we need to pass whatever law we need to domestically to break, if necessary, international law to take these people back to France. You cannot police There's no point trying to deal with the problem when it's already come home. You've got to deal with it at the border.
£500 million to France to deal with it.
So go and talk to France and sort it out there. That's where.
But we've tried talking, Joe. They don't do it.
I mean, I don't want to go down the Brexit route, but actually, when we were part of Europe, we had a little bit more sway than we do now.
Well,
although now we have the freedom, right, to not have. That's why Rwanda.
But you know, if we can't
project.
Police an island, then you know there's not a lot of hope for. This has been going on for a long time. The other thing, I mean, is. Given that the Home Office can't even get it together to sort out visas for Ukrainians that we're welcoming with open arms, I have absolutely no faith that this totally
We're back in violent agreement again.
Unfit for purpose government department could
I agree.
Yet they obviously, the Conservatives obviously think this is a vote winner. They think this is going to win
Bev, this
them
is how it's
votes.
going to play out. This is how it's going to play out. 6 weeks from now, everyone would have forgotten about the Rwandan policy. Hopefully Partygate will be in the distance in the rearview mirror. No one will be challenging him on the fact that Rwanda didn't work. People will go on complaining about the illegal migrants coming across the channel, but Rwanda will be forgotten. And that's what Boris is counting on. It was a great reminder you did at the beginning of the programme over all his other cockamamie failed schemes, because we don't really talk about them, do we? But that is Boris Johnson.
It is. It's the utopian thinking, which,
But it's not
which
even
some would say
it's not utopian.
But that's sort of what he. But the grand ideas that are unworkable is what I mean. This idea that we can.
It's good to have ideas. It's good to be bold and ambitious and think outside
But not
the
with
box and all of that.
money.
Not with taxpayers' money. And also, we know he's got absolutely no attention to or interest in the detail. Priti Patel has had to sign the order to overrule her permanent secretary, who has said there is nothing to prove that this will be a deterrent or that it is value for money. Now, it's appalling that it comes down to only being considered on value for money terms, not humanitarian or any other grounds. But it is absolutely disgusting. This country, under Boris Johnson, is a disgrace.
Well, watch this space, ladies and gentlemen. I'm sure we will carry on talking about this. And if Rwanda is in the distance, it's cost us how much did you say again, Ben?
Well, 120 million up front.
120 million up front. Oh, flippin' heck. Right. OK, coming up. Teachers say they feel like they are surrounded by giants. Kids are getting taller, but also quite a lot heavier. So do we need to revamp classrooms to accommodate bigger kids? More on that after the break.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Dewbs and Youre. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Dewbs and Youre.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back to Dewbs & Co with me, Bev Turner, for tonight and tomorrow evening. Now, I know this is a bit mean, given how much chocolate our kids are still munching through after yesterday, but we do need to talk about our childhood obesity pandemic. Teachers at the NAS UWT have expressed concern that classrooms are no longer fit for purpose because of the growing number of, well, growing children, with the weight of a 14-year-old male student increasing from an average of 5 stone 10 pounds in 1970 to 8 stone 5 today. According to one of the leaders of the Teachers' Union, the average height is also said to have risen in the past 50 years from 4'10" to 5'8". So the worry is that classrooms are not equipped to contain these ever-growing kids that are just getting bigger and bigger. We've got little flimsy plastic chairs. We've got classroom sizes made up of more than 30 kids. So what do we do about this? Whose responsibility is it? Should we be changing the infrastructure of the classroom to accommodate the children, or doing something else? Jo?
Well, I'm very dubious about these figures because that suggests that a 14-year-old boy, the average height has increased by a foot.
No, I think that's wrong, actually. I do apologise. The height thing wasn't right, but the weight is definitely the case. I think that height was more adult.
That is what she said. The average height is also said to have risen in the past 50 years from 4'10" to 5'8".
But I think that might be the average height of an adult, I wonder.
Maybe.
Yeah. Sorry about this.
Sorry.
As listeners. Well, we do like to get our facts right here. I think you're absolutely right.
I think there is a real problem about childhood obesity. There is no doubt about it. I haven't been inside, and we're talking about secondary schools, if we're talking about 14-year-old boys, I haven't been inside a secondary school apart from a school hall for a very, very long time. So I don't feel able to talk about the quality of the furniture or the desks, but I suspect they're a lot better than when I was at school, which was about 500 years ago. We still had inkwells, but we didn't have the quill pen. And primary schools, I know, as any parent's ever been to a primary school, you do sit on those. And if you ever want to go to the loo, you think, oh, I'm never going to get up again. So there's all of that going on. But the wider issue is, yes, of course, anybody should be able to be comfortable where they're working, learning, doing everything else. But we can't keep accommodating obesity because we're not dealing with the problem. And the problem is going to get a lot worse because COVID, we know, kids trapped indoors, eating a lot at home, comfort eating, not getting out, not getting in exercise, and so on and so forth. But the cost of living crisis is going to make it even worse. We know that 1 in 10 families are now using food banks. We know that it's only going to get worse, and as we move on into the autumn and winter of next year, it's going to get worse still. Saturated fats, processed foods, lack of availability to fresh fruit and veg, lack of cooking facilities in bad housing.
So some would say, though, if you're eating in food banks, your children are going to be underweight. But that's not what the statistics bear out, Lisa, is it? Why?
No. I mean, this is, to be honest, health inequalities, it's always been a class issue in this country. When I was young, children were underweight because we didn't have access to, probably the amounts of food that kids have today. But we can't just go on what was happening 50 years ago, because what is happening now is the cheapest food are the processed food. The cheapest food is
the high carbohydrate, the high sugar.
And that's actually the stuff that that parents will give their kids to fill them up.
I know.
Because if you haven't got a lot of money, I mean, anybody knows now, it's fruit, vegetables, eggs, these are not cheap. These are not cheap foods now.
I would say that in some ways, I'm interested to hear what you've got to think, you say about this, Ben, but in some ways, they're not the cheapest foods. I'm going to do that awful kind of, you know, that awful sort of middle-class woman thing here where I say, yes, but it's quite cheap to make a homemade vegetable soup and give your children oats for porridge. That's quite cheap. But I know it's more complicated than that.
Well, it is, but also, you know, I always refer to George Orwell on this point, because this is an issue that has been with us for a long, long time. And in 1931, in Road to Wigan Pier, George Orwell wrote about this same sort of middle-class view of the working class. Well, if they didn't spend all their money on coal, or, you know, the working class eat too much sugar, that's what the Daily Mail was saying in 1931. The working class eat too much sugar and, you know, they spend too much money on coal. And the argument that George Orwell made then, and I make now, and continue to make, is when you have got a rotten life, a bit of sugar in your tea will cheer you up.
But the trouble is, no one's having a bit of sugar in their tea.
No, but
now,
whatever it is, but the sugar in the 1930s was the equivalent, perhaps, to the pizza today, you know, or the high-fat cake or whatever.
It's
comfort.
But your point, Beverly, about the, you know, and I completely agree with you. It's ever so easy to go and make a vegetable soup.
Yeah.
And I remember sitting at a conference about food poverty many years ago and said porridge, and a woman sitting next to me said, that's a terribly middle-class concept.
I know it is.
Yeah, it is.
But it's
really
not.
Is.
But then it shouldn't be.
Food.
It shouldn't be.
No,
I was raised with my working-class mum making vegetable soups and porridge and home, and we had cakes, but she did homemade cakes.
Yeah.
We didn't have them every day. We just had them every now and
If you
again.
haven't got the facilities because you're living in a bedsit,
Yeah.
I mean, you know, there's only so much. Let's suppose you're in a bedsit that's damp, horrible, you can't afford to heat it, you're trying to make porridge with a kettle.
No.
You know, that's...
But then there's that but the thing is now is there are alternatives to porridge or whatever. Whereas when I was a kid, you know, we didn't have the alternative. You know, there was not lots of biscuits. You couldn't go in my fridge without my mum saying that you were allowed to go into it.
Yeah.
You know, you were eating whatever you was given, and that was it.
Absolutely.
And there wasn't a cake drawer or whatever. Whereas now, you know, you have to look at the manufacturers as well.
Oh, yeah.
And the way that they, you know, food is sort of pushed on people. So, you know, this is a much bigger issue that has been with us a long time.
Yeah. Ben?
Yeah, well, I mean, I completely agree. Nutrition is a class issue, and it's always been a class issue. It's manifesting itself now more in obesity than it is being an underfed and, you know, malnutritioned, if you like. But funny enough, I think we're going to see quite a correction in the next few years. What we're seeing now with the Ukraine war, with Russia, with the breakdown of global trading, which is effectively what's happening as we challenge Russia and Russia sides more with China, and we have this global reordering, I think we're going to find that we will suffer inflation. Inflation's going to be endemic for a while, and we're going to get back more of the, if you like, traditional problems associated with malnutrition in the more hard up.
Well, we
working
already
classes.
have that. You know, we already have a generation of children who are full and overweight, but malnourished.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, you
Yeah.
can be both
Yeah.
at the same
You
time.
can
which
be
is
all
very
of
sad.
the above, which is
But
the worst case
But the
scenario.
one thing I would like, it's not all negative, you know, because I think there is some truth in the height figures. And I think over 40 years, we have seen an overall improvement in the United Kingdom. One of the reasons these children are big is not just obesity. Some of them are just big. I remember going back to my old school about 10 years ago and meeting the first 15, and they looked like they could play for England. And when I was at school, you know, we were all just little boys.
But isn't that because we are consuming as many calories, these kids are consuming as a number of calories by the age of 15 that we would have traditionally done maybe by the age of 18, 19, that our human bodies are capable of processing. So we're growing taller, but with that comes the diabetes, with organ problems.
Teeth.
Kids.
And we've got no dentist, which is a thing I'm really
I mean, there is also the whole thing about...
Just sorry, Joe, 1 second. I just want to bring in our viewers. So Nick has messaged to say the problem with obesity is the parents are not caring for their children. They're failing their children and have been even before food poverty. I would say that these parents aren't overfeeding their children to be unkind. They're doing it because they can't say no. They're doing it out of love.
When did we not have food poverty, though? Can we just clarify that? When did we not have food poverty?
Yeah.
Because it has been with me all of my life.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
my mother's life and my grandmother's life.
Yeah. But it sort of goes back to what Lisa was saying earlier, and which is the George Orwell thing, which is, you know, this idea of treating. You know, it goes in with the sort of because you're worth it, treat yourself, whether it's a bar of chocolate or this. And so parents who are busy, who are stressed, pressured, maybe can't afford the big
Feeling
things.
guilty, working long hours.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Can't afford to go to Disneyland, but here's a packet of crisps and a box of chocolates, or let's get a pizza. There's all of that food is not regarded, and I'm not sure that it ever has been properly in this country. It is not regarded with the due respect that countries like Italy, a poor country that learnt to make the best food in the world and make a little bit go a long way.
We don't have that food culture. We did a poll, actually, and thank you to everybody on Twitter who voted on that. And we were talking about whether classrooms should be revamped to accommodate these larger children. That was our poll right there. 14% of you said yes. And 86% of you said, no, we shouldn't be changing the classrooms. We didn't ask you what you think we should do, and no doubt you can still get in touch with us and make suggestions. I imagine what a lot of you will say, and I feel this myself, is that the responsibility lies with the parents. Children can only eat what we give them.
Yeah, but look at school dinners. I mean, let's take this back to the classroom. Look at school dinners. Got rid of by previous governments. So actually what they get is processed rubbish. It's not cooked on site.
Well, I would say also it's about choice, isn't it? We've got this idea that we've got to give kids choice.
Well, I would argue much deeper than that, because what I'm really, you know, what do we want a good society to be? And I think this goes back to what we were thinking earlier about Rwanda. What people sit in a room and go, these are all great ideas. You know, they are not people, and I'm going to say it, they are people that have been the most highly educated people in the country, that are the most disconnected from people's lives.
Absolutely.
Some are sitting in rooms and going, I know this is a great idea. Oh, we'll get rid of school playing fields. Oh, yeah, we'll do, you know. And they never understand the connection that these things happen.
And the money that's been spent on obesity.
campaigns honestly
over the years. But it took Marcus Rashford, a young footballer, to make the government see sense about free school meals for kids who were forced out of school because of COVID lockdown.
I honestly think it's time. You know, this is not just about obesity or Rwanda or any of the stories that we talk about, because, you know, I am losing my temper at the moment, because I know that there are people sat in a room being paid who knows how much money, being educated in the best schools and universities in the world, and are doing the worst job possible. And I am, you know, how are we going to hold these people to account?
It feels, Ben, as well, though, like this is something that it's quite interesting to look back, because we've seen, all of us in our lifetime have seen this quite spectacular change with children's health, deteriorating children's health. And it kind of started in the 80s in America, where they introduced the low-fat diet. Very clever deception, because actually good, healthy fat is good for you, right? I have full-fat butter, I have full-fat milk, but I just don't have it all. I don't have as much as I want of it.
But I think it is a class issue, and part of it is education. I don't believe for a second that comment from your viewer that parents don't care about their children. I think that's nonsense. It's about knowing what is the right thing to do, having the ability to deliver what's right for your children, which is a privilege. You know, most people are living from hand to mouth. And if Boris Johnson is really serious about levelling up the country, one of the things he needs to tackle...
That's another one, levelling up.
You know, is this very basic understanding of what is good and bad for you. I'm completely against the nanny state, which Boris Johnson has upgraded... I call a wet nurse now. I think, we're absolutely all mollycoddled to the point that we can't exercise our own free will. But I think people need to know what is healthy, what is unhealthy, what's the best way to live, what is a cost-effective way to feed yourself and remain healthy. And none of these things are given priority in the United Kingdom.
Yeah.
And if Boris Johnson is really serious about levelling up, actually that's a really good place to start.
Yeah.
OK, super. Right, do you know that we are in the middle of a fourth industrial revolution? I'm going to test your history knowledge when we come back. I'll tell you what the first three were. But we need to talk about whether this is a good or bad thing. Are you even aware of it? Don't go anywhere.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Dewbs and Youre. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Dewbs and Youre.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back. I'm Bev Turner here for tonight and tomorrow evening while Michelle takes a well-earned break. Now, did you know that we're in the middle of an industrial revolution? Well, you should, because it is and will affect every area of our lives. OK, now cast your mind back to your minds back to the school history lesson. The first industrial revolution was the steam and water power in the 1700s. Remember that panel?
Yes.
Yeah.
It started in Cromford.
Oh, here we go.
Which
right.
is not far from where I was born.
Brilliant. OK, we're on that. All right, the second one was thanks to electricity and the light bulb, of course. The third was the digital revolution. This began in the 1970s with those early computers in our houses and big noisy factories. And now we are in the middle of what Matt Hancock described when he was digital minister in 2017 as the greatest challenge we face as a nation and as a world, which kind of begs the question why we're not discussing it more. Simplistically, it can be characterised as the greater integration of technology into our lives, which will cause societal transformation at a global scale. A cashless society, which in the words of the World Economic Forum leader Klaus Schwab, will blur the boundary between the digital and physical worlds. Basically, we won't be able to leave the house without one of these, and both big business and government will have greater access to your every move. Now, panel, in that same speech, Matt Hancock said, if you don't much like change, I'm afraid I don't have so much good news for you. So fast forward 5 years, panel, do you feel the greater encroachment of tech into our lives is a force for good or bad? Ben?
Well, I'm against it, but I think the tide is irreversible. It's happening. We need to embrace it. We need to somehow learn to live with it and neuter some of its more sinister aspects. I mean, I think cryptocurrencies, especially central bank-created cryptocurrencies, is a recipe for the ultimate in the nanny state, in this wet nurse, because they will then be able to monitor precisely what you're spending your money on, They'd be able to tax you at the point of expenditure, varying tax rates depending on what it is you wish to purchase. They'll know where you are when you're there. You know, this is all happening, and we see it all. We see it all around us already with cameras all over London. I mean, I can't imagine you can go down any street in London without being on a camera at some point. And you know, it's
Downing Street, I think.
Well, what were the two policemen outside Downing Street doing?
They're having a drink. They was having a drink and a
But you see, Ben,
agadoo.
and of course, all of the things you just identified have been enabled and facilitated with the pandemic. OK, so even Klaus Schwab, his book, The Great Global Reset, COVID-19, he talks about the fact that the pandemic has presented an opportunity...
To build back better.
To build back better.
And how's that working out?
Yeah.
Well,
we've
we
got a
don't
breakdown
know.
in supply chains, we've got inflation, we've got a cost of living crisis. So where are we building back better?
Frightened people.
The lockdowns, and I hope I'll get support, at least from Lisa as an anarchist, the lockdowns were the most draconian experiment in social and economic engineering. Extreme measures taken in a finely... You know, an economy is a finely balanced ecosystem. And they went in and threw a massive boulder into this still lake.
Now, in terms of the fourth industrial revolution, some would say that is necessary to effectively turn off our financial system, reset the computer, and we have to, in the words, build back better.
So what's changed then? So just let me think about this. What has changed in this new revolution? Because I know every time there is an industrial revolution, I know what happens. The rich get even richer, and the people at the bottom get even poorer and are therefore even more easily exploited.
And in the pandemic, we've seen the biggest transfer of wealth in the history of humanity.
Yeah. And, you know, if you know anybody who works in Amazon, in any of the Amazon warehouses, they will tell you how this works out, because this works out with cameras following them around, with digital... machines that are strapped to their body, which tells you how fast they walk.
Disempowered people, right?
Absolutely.
Disempowered individuals. Well,
but this is not happening. But this is not happening to the middle class, and it's not happening anywhere above. Because the middle class are now, the work that we used to do, I say we as a working class woman, the work that we used to do, which was we used to make things. We were made things and we were useful to society and we knew exactly why we were here. Do you know who does that work now? The artisanal hipster. You know, in Shoreditch, baking their little cakes.
Well, on that, actually...
But they're artisans.
Well, let me bring in, just before I come to you, Joe, 1 second. While Lisa's mentioned work, let me show you what Matt Hancock said in this speech in 2017.
Was he still married, then?
Was he still married? Yes, he was still married. Oh, Joe, that's very controversial. He's still married now, isn't he? Otherwise, it's a quick divorce. Right, this is what he said in 2017. The fourth industrial revolution will change the kind of jobs needed in industry. Our strong view is that as a nation, we must create the jobs of the future. Digital revolution brings with it disruption. And as the RSA so powerfully set out last month, the risk is not that we adopt new technologies that destroy jobs. The risk to jobs comes from not adopting new technologies. Our task is to support redeployment, not unemployment. Joe?
Well, that worked really well because there's been a lot of support from the government, hasn't there? I mean, I have to say that, broadly speaking, I agree with Lisa in the broadest terms. However, I have to say that doing simple things like taxing your car online is a damn sight easier because you can do it at 10 o'clock at night or 3 o'clock in the morning than having to go and queue at the post office. Getting a passport online, all of those things have made life a lot easier. But, you know, and that doesn't mean that you've got to have access to broadband and internet and all of those things which not everybody has. Banking online, you know...
It's also, I worry about the older generation with more tech.
Yes, but there is a point where, you know, there's always going to be an older generation, and it goes back to that, you know, whether it's an anecdotal quote or whatever, can you not bring in decimalisation
When
until
all
I'm
the
dead?
Old people, yeah.
You know, I mean, the problem is that it is used as, quite often, a smokescreen, if you like, for people not to engage at a human level. However, I had the misfortune of having to take my very elderly dad into hospital on Friday, A&E, and the treatment was absolutely wonderful, and we didn't wait more than, 20 minutes before somebody was coming to do something, and it was all on handheld computers. It wasn't, you know. That efficiency is great. Sadly, it doesn't transfer to you know, if you then try and link up with something else. There's an awful lot of stuff that technology has made faster, better and easier. And there are people who need to design those programmes. And if you think about things like 3D technology,
yes,
which have made fantastic advances in medical and scientific care possible, we can't say it's all bad.
Well, let's just look at the second half. It's not all bad, but let me just have a look at the second bit of the quote that Matt Hancock said in 2017, if we have that graphic. I'm not sure we've got it. I think it might have gone. We have got it. OK, here we go. So this is what he went on to say. Our goal must be to automate work but humanise jobs, allow machines to do the dangerous, boring, repetitive, ensure we humans have the capacity to do the creative, empathetic and interactive.
Yeah.
Well, that sounds lovely if we're all just going to sit around painting watercolours on our universal basic income. But actually, in reality, how do we do that? And also, Lisa, like you say, some people quite like to work with their hands. Some people quite like to make things.
You know, I come from a mining community. You know, I knew, I mean, you know, I left school at 16, went straight into a factory making tights. In 1984, when I was making tights, I was not making a pair of tights, I was loading a machine up.
Yeah.
That's what I was. So even then, you know, we were not making anything. But what was happening then is people were connected to the product they were making. And people knew where those factories was, who was doing that. Everybody in the community sort of knew things. Now, where is your tights made? You don't know. You don't even know where you buy them because you click a button, you don't know who's delivering them.
Well, we've offshored most of it, haven't we?
And what has happened is the working class, the international working class, have been disappeared by this technology. And that is not a good thing because if you don't exist, then you don't get rights.
You see, the irony, Ben, of Matt Hancock talking about the Fourth Industrial Revolution as a way to humanise jobs. And yet, all I think technology generally does, it does dehumanise. Like Lisa was saying.
It's antisocial, isn't it?
When I go into the shop, when I go to the till, I don't want to be in a supermarket where I swipe my phone to pay for. I like to have a little chat at the till. Call me old-fashioned, but I think human beings are quite fun.
But some people
quite nice to talk to.
And some people don't for a variety of reasons. And I think, you know, it's a question of having both.
Yeah.
I will refuse to use self-service tills. You know, if I wanted to be a shop assistant, I'd be a shop assistant. I'd rather talk
But
to
you
somebody
may not have the
and
choice.
stand in a
Once
queue.
the Fourth Industrial Revolution is underway, there will be
Well,
no
it is
people.
underway.
Well,
It is underway.
But also,
it
I
is
think
underway,
as
but we
well,
are still in the early stages.
There is a question. I mean, Barbara Heinrich, who was a feminist philosopher, she asked this question quite a number of years ago: who is entitled to interesting work and who is not? And this is what I think this sort of, we are, you know, the creative industries have grown massively, but who are in those interesting work and who is not? Who is in the Amazon warehouses with no choice over anything about their daily life, but then who does the interesting work? And our class system in this country now is as deep and as inherent as it ever was, and it is getting deeper.
Arguably deeper, absolutely. Ben, last question to you. Why do we not hear more people talking about these significant socio-economic, cultural changes? Why aren't we discussing it more? This is one of the first places that I've been allowed to discuss it.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think we all kind of sleepwalk into this, don't we? Joe made some really positive comments about the Fourth Industrial Revolution. I don't want to be just a naysayer.
And it may not be all bad.
And it certainly isn't all bad. And, I mean, one thing, you know, if you're a promoter and believer in net zero by 2050, actually, if anything's going to get you there, it's the Fourth Industrial Revolution. We need new technology in order to wean ourselves off traditional forms of fuel. It's critical. And I'm a scientist by background, so I love technological advancement. What we've got to learn to do quite carefully is to balance that with the need to be gregarious social animals, which is inherently human.
Exactly.
And that's the challenge we're facing, I think,
and not
as we
lose
go
our
into
humanity.
this. Yeah.
OK, right, well, you heard it here first. Make sure you get in touch with us, won't you, on Twitter and let us know what you think. Right, now, midwives have been discouraged from saying vagina when dealing with pregnant transgender patients if they dislike the terminology. The guidance was introduced by health chiefs in Brighton and Sussex University Hospitals NHS Trust as part of its policy on perinatal care for transgender and non-binary people. I have known for 10 years that this was in the offing. I was working in antenatal education. I ran a business for several years. I wrote a book called The Happy Birth Book, available in all good bookshops. It's all about empowerment, and it's all about knowing the conversations to have in a hospital setting if you're having a baby. And actually, what all the evidence shows is that women who have traumatic births don't talk about pain. They don't talk about the fact that what they describe is that nobody listened to me. This is the recurring message from women who have bad births. I didn't understand the language. I didn't understand why they did this to me. Nobody heard me when I tried to make myself understood. So language in the birth room is incredibly important. Now, that means that it's right to get the language right for transgender parents to be as well. Jo, it's a minefield, this, because I am, as much as I want to respect everybody's experience in the birth world, but we are at risk, are we not? I was going to say of throwing the baby out with the bathwater, which is, I didn't realise, was the perfect metaphor.
No, absolutely. And I think, you know, an awful lot of health issues, particularly for young women and women generally, but not exclusively women, are because of a reluctance and an embarrassment about talking about our bodies. Now, if you have silly little words that many people do, you know, and you talk about sort of, or we all know those sort of old ladies with a problem down there and all that sort of stuff.
I wrote an article for The Telegraph once. It was my best piece of journalism about what you could call your nether regions. You can find it online.
Exactly.
I came up with dozens.
Well, and I thought, well, we could probably have a list of them tonight. But if you actually are not able to have a conversation about your vagina, your cervix, your breasts, or anything else, your anus, whatever it is, because you're too embarrassed, then you're not actually doing yourself, your children, or your health any good. The other thing I would say about this we have said this on this programme before, is that women are being disproportionately affected by the whole transgender debate and things, because women are not listened to, as you've just said, in many, many settings. Women are, you know, discriminated against in terms of workplace, pay, health, on so many levels. And now it seems that, you know, women have got to be the ones to accommodate this otherness, which we all want to get right, and we all need to be respectful.
And we can all have
all
compassion for individual people who are, no doubt, there must be almost nothing worse than growing up and thinking you have been born in the wrong body. We shouldn't be too easy to dismiss those individual personal stories. We have to be compassionate. But, Lisa, the cost, as Jo says, is that it is women who, it's our identity that's being eroded. It feels like we've only just got it. Like, in terms of history, we've only had our freedoms in the blink of an eye.
Not all women. I mean, we're still not there. I mean, we still aren't there yet. I think what worries me about this whole debate is the way that language can be removed. That all of a sudden, there's words that can be removed. And that really worries me, because if the word can be removed, and you know, I talk a lot about class, and I know that once you start removing words, you start removing meanings, and then you start removing people. And then those people have no rights at all, because they don't even exist.
Exactly. And we become invisible.
Ben, well, the thing that amazes me here is that, again, coming from it slightly from a scientific background, is these words exist because scientists want to be utterly clear about what it is they're referring to. And, you know, it's a vagina because that's a vagina. It's a uterus because it's a uterus. And when a scientist speaks to, or doctor speaks to another doctor and says, well, I've got a problem with the fallopian tubes, or I want to refer to the uterus, they know what they're talking about. If they have to hijack their language in order to satisfy the political sensitivities and sensibilities of a minority group, then you're going to throw, as you said, Bev, the baby out with the bathwater. People have got to just... This is not quite the right word. People have got to man up a little bit.
Rather unfortunate, Ben.
I walked right into that.
I mean, listen, it's us who give birth, all right? It's not that easy. Maybe you should be womaning up a bit, right? We're talking about being tough. But it's absolutely paramount, isn't it, that we get the language right, but that we don't lose what is incredibly important, which is to make people understood and to take the fear out of conversation.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's what worries me.
That's where we
You've
are
got
at the
midwives who are
moment.
already operating under a very difficult set of circumstances in hospitals. Defensive practice because they think they're going to get sued. It's a nightmare. But anyway, we are very grateful that you've all been here tonight. Thank you so much for watching. You can catch me tomorrow night at 6.
Let's look at this evening's weather. The UK is looking mostly fine in the southeast, rather showery in the north and the west. Let's look at the details. The southwest of England, there's going to be a few showers. Most of these, though, should leave space for some bright and sunny spells that will develop, giving a fine end to the day. The southeast is going to hold on to some of the best of the weather. It's going to be dry and bright and still feeling pleasantly warm in light winds. A real mix of bright spells and scattered showers. Let's have a look at Wales and similar stories.